Hi, this is Channa Borman here with straight talk and honest advice about family law. And today I want to talk about effective tips for co-parenting. Co-parenting is a buzzword that's frequently bantered about when you talk with people who are divorced. Now, in my experience, I found that the divorce itself is not what causes trauma or difficulties for children. In my experience, what causes difficulties for children is conflict between the parties. And so having mechanisms for co-parenting is usually helpful to try to reduce the stress on the children. And so I'd like to go through a couple of those tips that I've accumulated over the years for you today. The first rule of co-parenting really is to live by the golden rule. Now, as you know, the golden rule is to treat others as you want to be treated. And so in that vein, do things like make sure that your expectations are conveyed to the other side. That is to say, if they don't know what you're expecting to have happen on any given event or day, they can't possibly fulfill your expectations. And so the conflict that arises because your expectations aren't fulfilled and you're angry, they don't have any idea what your expectations were, so they couldn't fulfill them. So be fair to the other side by conveying your expectations and living by the golden rule. Step number 2 is to keep an open dialogue with your ex. And what I mean by keeping an open dialogue is agreeing that you're going to communicate by a certain mechanism. That is to say, set up a specific email account and check that email account routinely. Alternatively, you could set up a joint Google calendar that both of you have access to. Those are free techniques that you can use to keep that information flowing. But alternatively, you could each subscribe to an online co-parenting website such as Our Family Wizard, which is very helpful, I think, for most parents when they're trying to convey information. Now, not to be an ad for Our Family Wizard, but they have a calendar and they have a messaging system and they have a bill conveying system. So they say, hey, I took the kid to the doctor, cost me $40, you owe me half of that. And everything is then documented, can't be modified later, and very useful in court. So Our Family Wizard, again, is a really great resource and relatively cheap for both sides. Tip number 3 is not to make derogatory comments about the other parent in front of the children. And by that, I mean, not just in front of the children when they're in the same room, but when they're in the same zip code, right? So kids are pretty slick. They can hear you, it seems like, when you are outside in the backyard and they're in their bedrooms. So be very mindful of what you say about the other parent within the children's awareness at all. And not just you, what your family says about the other parent is also really critical. So making disparaging comments about the other parent essentially means you're making disparaging comments about half of your child. And whether or not you can really key into that, your child certainly does. And so the number one thing you can do to effectively co-parent, I think, for just the health and well-being of your child is not to berate the other parent. So effective co-parenting tip number 3 from Channa is don't make disparaging comments. Effective co-parenting tip number 4 is to be mindful of the child's schedule. And child's schedule would include extracurricular activities. It includes bedtime generally. It includes getting up in the morning. Is your child one that likes to eat before school or not eat before school? Do they have breakfast at school? You know, what are your child's specific needs and preferences? And in that vein, keeping a schedule house to house really isn't what's important here so much as being mindful that the child's goals and the child's needs in terms of both, going to extracurricular activities, no matter which parent is in possession, those kinds of things are really what you need to focus on. I think if anything, trying to control when the other parent maybe puts the child to bed or when they feed them dinner or what they feed them dinner, those types of control or hopeful control mechanisms are really a detriment to co-parenting more than help. So I think number 4 tip to co-parenting is focus on your kid's schedule. Hopefully you found these tips for effective co-parenting helpful. Check out my companion video, Tips for Effective Co-Parenting with a Jerk. If you have any more questions, give us a call today.